backpack. Whew. I bars. Let's get it. Io, Iago, Iambic, Iambus, Ian, Iana, Iasis, Iatrix, Iatree, Iberia, Iberian, Ibex, Ibidum, or Ibidum, ability, Ibis, Ibel, Henrik Obson, Echo, Icarus, Icarian, ICBM, ICC, Ice, break the ice, on thin ice, cut no ice, iceless, icer, ice age, ice bag, iceberg, ice boat, icebound, icebox, icebreaker, ice cap, ice cream, iced, ice field flow or flow, ice free, ice hockey, ice house, Iceland, Icelander, Icelandic, Iceman, ice pack, ice pick, ice sheet, Acunium, Acunamon fly, Ecor, Icarus, Ethio, Ethiology, Ethiology, Ethiological, Ethiologic, Ethio, Ethiologic, Ethiological, Ethiology, Ethiologists, Ichthyosaur, Ichthyosaurus, um, Ichthyosaurus, Ichthyology, okay, ichthyological, ichthyologic, okay. Issue icicle, icicled, icing, icon, iconical, icona, iconoclast, iconoclasm, iconoclastic, iconoclastic, iconoclastically, iconoscope, ictus, icy, icily, iciness, Idaho, Idahoan, idea, idealist, idealness, idealism, idealist, idealistically, idealize, idealization, idealizer, ideally, ideate, ideation, ideational, edifix, edifix, item, identical, identically, identicalness, identical twins, identification, identify, identifier, identifiable, identity, ideogram, ideograph, ideographic, ideographical, ideographically, ideological, ideologic, ideologically, ideology, ideologist, idiocy, idiom, idiomatic, idiomatical, idiomatically, idiosyncrasy, idiosyncratic, idiosyncratically, idiot, imbecile, moron, idiotic, idiotically, idle, idleness, idler, idly, idle, idolater, idolatrous, idolatrous, idolatrously, idolatrousness, idolatry, idolize, idolization, idolizer, idol, idolist, idolist, idolically, idolically, i.e., ire, if, as if, igloo, Ignatius of Loyola, Igneous, Ignis Fatuus, Ignis Fatuus, Ignis Fatuus, ignite, ignitable, ignitable, ignitability, ignitability, igniter, ignition, ignoble, ignobility, ignobleness, itably, ignominious. There would be that in the background. Ignominiously, ignominiousness, ignominy, ignoramus, ignorance, ignorant, ignorantly, ignore, ignorant, igorote, iguana, IHS, icon, Isle Duce, Isle, Ilium, Iliac, Iliac, Ilex, Iliad, Ility, Ilium, Iliac, Ilium, ilk, of that ilk, ill at ease, I'll advisedly, ill being, ill bred, ill breeding, ill considered, ill disposed, illegal, illegality, illegalness, illegally, illegible, illegibility, illegibleness, eligibly, illegitimate, illegitimacy, illegitimately, illegitimateness, ill-fated, ill-favored, ill-favored, ill-favoredly, ill-favoredness, ill-founded, ill-gotten, ill-humor, ill-humor, ill-humored, ill-humoredly, ill-humoredness, ill-humor, ill-humoredly, ill-humoredness, illiberal, illiberalness, illiberality, illiberally, illicit, illicitly, illicitness, illimitable, illimitable, illimitability, illimitableness, illimitably, illinium, promethium, Illinoisian, illiteracy, illiterate, illiterately, illiterateness, ill-manneredly, ill-manneredness, ill-naturedly, ill-naturedness, illness, illogical, illogicality, illogicalness, illogically, ill-spent, ill-starred, ill-suited, ill-tempered, ill-temperedly, ill-temperedness, ill-timed, ill-treatment, illuminate, illuminatingly, illuminative, illuminator, illumination, illuminable, ill usage, ill use, illusion, illusional, illusionist, elusive, elusively, elusiveness, illusory, illusorily, illusoriness, illustrate, illustrator, illustration, illustrative, illustratively, illustrious, illustriousness, illustriously, ill will, illy, illyria, illyrian, image, imagery, imaginable, imaginably, imaginary, imaginarily, imagination, imaginational, imaginative, imaginatively, imaginativeness, imagism, imagistic, imago, imbecile, imbecilic, imbecility, embedded, imbibed, imbricate, imbiber, imbricated, imbricatedly, imbrication, imbroglio, imbruement, imbuement, imitable, imitability, imitate, imitator, imitation, imitational, imitative, imitatively, imitativeness, immaculate, immaculately, immaculateness, immaculate conception, imminence, imminency, imminent, imminently, Emmanuel, immaterial, immaterially, immaterialness, immature, immaturity, immatureness, immaturely, immeasurable, immeasurability, immeasurableness, immeasurably, immediacy, immediate, immediateness, immediately, immemorially, immensely, immenseness, immensity, immerse, immigrant, immersion, immigrate, immigration, imminence, imminency, imminent, immiscible, imminently, immissibly, immiscibility, immobile, immobilize, immobilization, immoderate, immoderately, immoderateness, immoderation, immodest, immodestly, immodesty, emulate, emulation, emulator, uh, immoral, immorally, immorality, immortal, immortality, immortality, immortalize, immortalization, immortalizer, immortal, immovable, immovability, immovableness, immovably, immune body, immunity, immunization, immunology, immunologic, immunological, immunologist, immurement. Dang. Immutable, immutability, immutableness, immutably, impacted, impaction, impairment, impalement, impaler, impalpable, impalpability, impalpably, impanel, impart, impartation, imparter, impartible, impartial, impartially, impartialness, impartiality, impassible, impassibility, impossibleness, impossibly, impossible, impossibility, impossibleness, impassibility, impassibleness, impassibly, impassioned, impassionately, impassionedness, impassively, impassiveness, impassivity, impatience, impatientness, impatiently, impeachability, impeachable, impeachment, impeccable, impeccability, impeccably, impecunious, impecuniosity, impecuniously, impecuniousness, impotence, impetter, impedingly, impediment, impedimental, impedimentary, impedimenta, impeller, impedance, impedency, impending, impenetrable, impenetrability, impenetrableness, impenetrably, impenitent, impenitence, impenitency, impenitently, imperatively, imperativeness, imperator, imperatorial, imperatorially, imperceptible, imperceptibility, imperceptibleness, imperceptibly, imperceptive, imperfect, imperfectly, imperfectness, imperfection, imperforate, imperforated, imperforation, imperial, imperially, imperialness, imperial, gallon, imperialism, imperialistic, imperialistically, imperial valley, imperial, imperiously, imperiousness, imperishable, imperishability, imperishableness, imperishably, impermanent, impermanence, impermanency, impermanently, impermeable, impermeability, impermeableness, impermeably, impersonal, impersonally, impersonality, impersonate, personation, impersonator, impertinence, impertinency, impertinent, pertinently, impertinently, impertible, impertibly, impertibleness, impertibly, impervious, imperviously, imperviousness, impetigo, impetuosity, impetuously, impetuousness, impetus, impiety, impinger, impingement, impiously, impiousness, impishly, impishness, implacable, implacability, implacableness, implacably, implantation, implanter, implausible, implausibly, implementation, implicative, implicatory, implication, implicit, implicitly, implicitness, implied, implore, imploration, implore, imploringly, imply, impolitely, impoliteness, impolitically, impoliticness, imponderable, imponderability, imponderableness, imponderably, import, importable, importability, importance, important, importantly, importation, importer, importunate, importunately, importunateness, importune, importunely, importuner, importunity, impose, impose on or upon, imposable, imposer, imposingly, imposingness, imposition, impossibility, impossible. Impossibleness, impossibly, impostor, imposture, impotence, impotency, impotent, impotentness, impotently, impound, impounder, impoverishment, impoverisher, empower, impractical, impracticable, impracticability, impracticableness, impracticably, impractical, impracticality, imprecate, imprecation, imprecator, imprecatory, impregnable, impregnability, impregnableness, impregnably, impregnate, impregnable, impregnation, impregnator, impresario, imprescriptible, imprescriptibility, imprescriptibly, impressment, impress, impressibility, impressible, impressor, impression, impressionable, impressionability, impressionableness, impressionism, impressionistic, impressive, impressively, impressiveness, imprimatur, imprint, imprison, imprinter, imprisonment, improbable, improbability, improbableness, improbably, impromptu, improper, improperly, improperness, improper fraction, impropriety, improve, improve on or upon, improvability, improvableness, improvable, improvably, improvement, improvidence, improvidently, improvise, improvisation, improvisational, improviser, imprudent, imprudence, imprudently, impudence, impudency, impudent, impudently, impugnation, impugnable, impugnment, impugner, impulse, impulsion, impulsive, impulsively, impulsiveness, impunity, impure, impurely, impureness, impurity, imputation, imputative, amputatively, amputativeness, imputable, imputer, imputably, in, have it in for, ins and outs, in that, in with, in, inability, in absentia, inaccessible, inaccessibility, inaccessibleness, inaccessibly, inaccuracy, inaccurate, inaccurately, inaction, inactivation, inactive, inactivity, inactiveness, inactively, inadequacy, inadequateness, and inadmissible, inadmissibly, inadmissibility, inadvertency, inadvertently, inadvisability, inadvisableness, inavisibly, inalienability, inalienably, inamorata, inanimately, inanition, inanity, inapplicable, inapplicableness, inapplicably, inapplicability, inappositely, inappreciable, inappropriate, inappropriately, inappropriateness, inaptness, inaptitude, inarticulately, inarticulateness, inartistic, inartistically, inasmuch, inattention, inattentive, inattentively, inattentiveness, inaudible, inaudibility, inaudibly, inaugurate, inauguration, inaugurator, inauspicious, inauspiciously, inauspiciousness, inborn, inbound, inbred, inbreed, inbreeding, inca, inkin, incalculable, incalculability, incalculableness, incalculably, incandescently, incandescent lamp, incandescency, incantation, incapable of, incapability, incapableness, incapably, incapacitate, incapacitation, incapacity, incarcerate, incarceration, incarcerator, incarnadine, incarnate, incarnation, encase, encasement, incaution, incautious, incautiously, incautiousness, incendiarism, incendiarism, incense, incense like incensement, incentive, inception, inceptive, incertitude, incessance, incessancy, incessantly, incest, incestuously, incestuousness, inch by inches, every inch, within an inch of one's life, inch meal by inch meal, inchoately, inchoateness, inchoative, inch, warm, incidence, angle of incidence, incident, incidental, incidentally, incinerate, incineration, incinerator, incipient, incipients, incipiency, incipiently, incise, incised, incision, incisive, incisively, incisiveness, incisor, incitation, incite, incitingly, incitement, inciter, incivility, inclement, inclemency, inclemently, inclination, inclinational, incline one's ear, inclinable, incline, incliner, incline plane. Mm, mm, mm. This one a doozy, man. Incline plane, inclimeter, enclosure, include, includable, includable, inclusion, inclusive, inclusively, inclusive of, inclusiveness, incognito, incoherency, incoherent, incoherently, incombustible, incombustibility, incombustibleness, incombustibly, income tax, incommensurable, incommensurability, incommensurableness, incommensurably, incommensurate, incommensurateness, incommensurately, incommode, incommodious, incommodiously, incommodiousness, incommunicable, incommunicability, incommunicatableness, incommunicably, incommunicado, incomparable, incomparability, incomparableness, incomparably, incompatible, incompatibility, incompatibleness, incompatibly, incompetent, incompetency, incompetence, incompetently, incomplete, incompletely, incompleteness, incompletion, incomprehensible, incomprehensibility, incomprehensibleness, incomprehensibly, incompressible, incompressibility, inconceivable, inconceivability, inconceivableness, inconceivably, inconclusive, inconclusively, inconclusiveness, incongruity, incongruous, incongruousness, incongruously, inconsequently, inconsequence, inconsequentiality, inconsequentially, inconsiderableness, inconsiderably, inconsiderately, inconsiderateness, inconsideration, inconsistency, inconsistently, inconsolable, inconsolability, inconsolableness, inconsolably, inconsonance, inconsonantly, inconspicuousness, inconspicuously, inconstantly, incontestable, incontestancy, incontestability, incontestableness, incontestably, incontinent, incontinently, incontinence, incontrovertibility, incontrovertibleness, incontrovertibly, incontrovertible, inconvenience, inconveniently, inconvertible, um, inconvertibility, inconvertibleness, inconvertibly, incorporate, incorporative, incorporator, incorporated, incorporation, incorporeal, incorporeally, incorrect, incorrectly, incorrectness, incorrigible, incorrigibility, incorrigibleness, incorrigibly, incorruptible, incorruptibility, incorruptibleness, incorruptibly, increase, increasable, increaser, increasingly, incredible, incredibility, incredibleness, incredibly, incredulity, incredulous, incredulously, incredulousness, increment, incremental, incriminate, incrimination, incriminator, incriminatory, incrust, incrustation, incubate, incubation, incubational, incubative, incubator, incubus, inculcate, inculcation, inculcation, inculcator, inculpate, inculpation, incumbency, incumbent on or upon, incumbently, encumber, encumbrance, incunabula, 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 incunabular, incurable, incurableness, incurably, incurability, incuriousness, curiosity, incuriously, incursion, incursive, incurve, incus, indebtedness, indecency, indecently, indecipherability, indecision, indecisively, indecisiveness, declinably, indecorousness, indecorum, indeed, indefatigable, indefatigability, indefatigableness, indefatigably, indefeasibility, indefensible, indefensibility, indefensibleness, indefensibly, indefinableness, indefinably, indefiniteness, indefinitely, indecent. Indecence, indelibility, indelibly, indelicacy, indelicately, indelicateness, indemnify, indemnification, indemnifier, indemnity, indenter, indentation, indention, indenture, independence, Santa Fe Trail, Independence Day, independency, independent, independent of, independently, independent clause, indescribable, indescribability, indescribableness, indescribably, indestructibility, indestructibleness, indestructibly, indestructible, indeterminable, indeterminably, indeterminableness, indeterminate, indeterminately, indeterminateness, indetermination, index finger, indexer, India, India Inc., India Man, Indiana, Indianapolis, Indian Club, Indian Corn, Indian File, Indian Giver, Indian Meal, Indian Ocean, Indian Pipe, Indian Pudding, Indian Summer, Indian Tobacco, Indian Paper, India Paper, India Rubber, indicate, indication, indicative, indicatively, indicator, indicatory, indices, indictor, indictable, indictment, indies, indifference, indifferent, indifferently, indigence, indigenous, indigenously, indigenous, indigently, indigestible, indigestibility, indigestibleness, indigestibly, indigestion, indignantly, indignation, indignity, indigo blue, indigo bunting or bird, indirect, indirectly, indirectness, indirect discourse, indirection, indirect lighting, indirect object, indirect tax, indiscernible, indiscernibleness, indiscernibly, indiscreet, indiscreetly, indiscreetness, indiscretion, indiscriminate, indiscriminately, indiscriminateness, indiscrimination, indispensability, indispensableness, indispensably, indisposition, indisputable, indisputably, indisputableness, indisputably, indissolvable, indissolubility, indissolubleness, indissolubly, indistinct, indistinctness, indistinctly, indistinguishableness, indistinguishably, inditer, indium, individualism, individualistic, individuality, individualizer, individualization, individually, indivisibility, indivisibly, indivisibleness, Indochina, Indochinese, indoctrination, indoctrinator, Indo-European, Germanic, Indo-Iranian, Indo-Iranian, indolence, indolently, indomitable, indomitableness, indomitably, Indonesia, Indonesian, indoor, baseball, endorsable, endorsee, endorsement, endorser, indubitable, indubitableness, indubitably, inducer, inducible, inducement, inducted, inductee, inductile, inductility, induction, coil, inductive, inductively, inductiveness, inductivity, inductor, indulge, indulger, indulgingly, indulgence, indulgently, indurate, induration, indurative, industrially, industrial arts, industrialism, industrialist, industrialize, industrialization, industrial relations, industrial union, industriously, industriousness, industry, indwell, ein or inebriate, inebriated, inebriation, inebriety, inebriety. Inedible, inedibility, ineffable, ineffable, ineffableness, ineffably, ineffability, ineffaceable, ineffaceability, ineffaceably, ineffectively, ineffectiveness, ineffectual, ineffectuality, ineffectualness, ineffectually, ineffacious, inefficaciously, inefficaciousness, inefficiency, inefficient, inefficiency, inefficiently, inelastic, inelastic, inelasticity, inelasticity, inelastic city, inelastically, inelasticity. Wow. Inelegance. Inelegantly, ineligibility, ineligibly, ineligible, ineluctable, ineluctability, ineluctably, ineptly, ineptness, ineptitude, inequality, inequitable, inequitably, iniquity, ineradicable, ineradicableness, ineradicably, inertly, inertness, inertia, inertial, inescapable, inestimable, inestimably, inevitable, inevitability, inevitableness, inevitably, inexactly, inexactness, inexcusable, inexcusability, inexcusably, inexhaustible, inexhaustibility, inexhaustibly, inexorable, inexorability, inexorableness, inexorably, inexpedient, inexpediency, inexpedience, inexpediently, inexpensive, inexpensively, inexpensiveness, inexperience, inexpert, inexpertly, inexpertness, inexpiable, inexpiableness, inexpiably, inexplicable, inexplicability, inexplicableness, inexplicably, inexpressible, inexpressibility, inexpressibleness, inexpressibly, inexpressive, inexpressively, inexpressiveness, inextensible, inextensibility, inextenso, inextinguishable, whew, inextinguishably, inextricable, inextricability, inextricableness, inextricably, infallible, infallibility, infallibleness, infallibly, famous, infamously, infamousness, infamy, infancy, infancy, infanta, infanticide, infanticidal, infantile paralysis, infantilism, infantryman, infatuate, infatuation, infatuated, infatuatedly, infector, infection, infectiously, infectiousness, infectiveness, infectivity, infelicitous, infelicitously, infelicity. Infelicity. All right, man, that's I bars. We'll be back to finish this in a minute. Subscribe. You already know.